Hi, everybody. So exciting. I'm just on live now. Frankie from Fab Parenting, and I am going to invite my friend Christina Hillsberg, another amazing parenting author, to join me. So I see she just logged in, and I'm going to invite her. All right, let's see. I love it when technology works. Hold on one moment. There we go. She's
Hi,
here. Hi.
how are you?
I'm good. I'm always sort of amazed when the tech works uh, on social
I know,
media.
right? You never know.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's so good to see you, like, sort of in person. I know we've been
Yeah.
talking for a while. Um, and I'm just so excited to talk tonight. It's such a fun community, sort of that parenting author space. And I was just thinking, when I first found Christina um, on social media and I was looking to collaborate with some other authors. I'm like, maybe there's something that our books have in common. And you were like, probably not. And I couldn't understand, like, I'm like, really? There's not that many theories. Like, how different could it be? But then I started listening on Audible to Licensed to Parent. And I'm like, oh yeah, no. She's right. Like, it's so different and so fresh and unique. And
Thank
I
you.
just, yeah, I so enjoyed it. And I'm so curious, like, what made you jump from, CIA agent and mom to author? Like, where did that idea come from?
Well, I've always loved to write, and one of the key things I did at the CIA was write. I spent the most of my career as an analyst, and so I like to say that that's really where I learned how to write well. But
Hmm.
when I was there, I was doing a lot of data driven. I mean, it was intelligence analysis, so it's very different. So actually leaving and being able to write more creatively has just been an amazing outlet for me as a mom, especially as a stay-at-home mom, to be able to explore that part in this new chapter of life has been really fun. And this has been a great book because it combined my experience at the CIA and also my experience as a parent. And it's something that my husband and I did together. So it's like memoir meets parenting book. And
Yep.
so in part one is a lot of my story. It's all in my voice, but it's my story of joining the CIA. But in part two, Ryan has these great little like sidebars with his
Hmm.
operational stories, which is really fun. And so it was great for us. We worked together at the CIA a lot
Okay.
and loved working together. And then we actually both left and worked at Amazon together for a while. And then since I decided to stay home, we haven't had that dynamic. And so to be able to do this was also a really great opportunity as well.
So cool. And I love when I was listening, it was so fun when his voice popped up. Like, it's a nice little change and it's cool to hear his perspective. And I get that, like, when you become a mom and it takes so much of your time and your brain space, like having a project to collaborate on with your husband, it's really cool. I was just saying to my husband that he's an engineer and like his brain works really differently. And some of the best times I think we've had together were maybe a little stressful too, but like things like when we were moving and like looking for new houses, right? Or like, I don't know, something silly, like having to redo part of our house. But when we were working on sort of a common goal together and planning and dreaming, and those are like nice things to bring us together. So, we're not moving anytime soon. So we're going to have to come up with another
Yeah,
project.
some sort of project. Yeah, it was great. But I love connecting with parenting authors like you because, I never set out to write a parenting book. And I really do think of it as a parenting book for people who don't love parenting books or feel
Mm,
overwhelmed by parenting books
sure.
because there are so many. And so it is really written more as like our story. And I think our expertise really is in more of espionage and how we've applied that to raise well-rounded security conscious kids. But I love connecting with parenting authors who are experts in that field like you. Like I have your book right here. I've already been like thumbing through it. It just came in the mail a
Oh,
couple days
yay.
ago. And like I have to tell you that the first section I went to, and it's dog-eared right here, is taming tantrums after toddlerhood because I so rely on tips like this because I have 5 kids. They range from 3 to 19 and I'm just in
Mhm.
the thick of it with my 3-year old. And so
Oh
I
boy.
was like literally like highlighting like I'm going to do all of this. So I just so value all
Uh,
of that expertise so much.
yeah, it's an exhausting phase. And I like to talk about tantrums because there's no one who couldn't use another tip, including me, right? Like it was my background, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
And I also really, unfortunately, I hate to, you already know this because you have older kids, but sometimes people look at me with horror when I say this, but they don't always stop when they hit 4. And
I know.
even, right, teenagers have tantrums
They
too. We
just
just like,
change. They're just
right, we
different.
don't,
Yeah.
if you told your teenager they were having a tantrum, like it probably wouldn't go well. We call them
Yeah.
meltdowns or like
Yeah, and
losing it
even as
again.
even as
Right.
adults, we have like, oh,
Yes.
I lost it today, or I had a meltdown. Like they exist just like in different forms. But another thing I
Right.
love what you do in your book that I actually do think there's some overlap. I found some similar
Oh, good,
themes.
good.
Is you talk about how things vary according to child and how
Mm,
children are so different. And so your approach might be really different with each child. And we talk a lot about that in License to Parent in terms of like the level of
hmm.
responsibility that we're giving our
Yes.
kids and the level of just autonomy, because we really are big proponents of not being helicopter parents, but I wouldn't say that we're like total free range parents. We're kind of in between. It's all about
Sure.
like balancing the autonomy with boundaries. And we talk a lot about how it's going to vary according to child and it's going to vary according to family. And so I'm really big on whatever parenting book someone reads, whether it's mine, yours, or many, many of the others they have to
Right.
choose from, that they take what works and leave the rest. Because
Absolutely.
just like it varies according to child, it's going to vary according to family as well. And people are going to have things that, they see and they automatically think, oh, this is going to work for me and our family. Or they might see it and think, ooh, no thanks. And it's not like a all or nothing approach. You don't have to like 100% agree with someone's entire
Sure.
book to find some nuggets that work for you.
Absolutely. And what's really I found great about your philosophy is yes, you do believe in raising independent kids, but you're not just saying, okay, like here guys, like I'm going to drop you off in the city and you'll be great.
Yeah.
Like you got this. No, you're strategically teaching them these great skills, many of which I wouldn't have thought to teach and I love, but I really found myself reflecting upon some other training I had and, living in the world we live in today, which is quite overwhelming as a parent. I worked for some nonprofit organizations. I worked for the Jewish community right after we had a series of bomb threats in the Detroit Jewish community with, school violence. And we just had a horrible tragedy happen not far away from me. I've had now a lot of this training that I never would have expected to need or get in my field. And, the thing that always echoed in my brain is like, just being aware of your surroundings. And if you see something, say something. And as I was listening to your book, I'm like, oh, wow. Well, these are things I could bring into parenting now, especially
Yeah,
with
that's
school
great.
it's a it's an overwhelming time, and I've been trying to help my community get through this. So, I think there's some really practical tips in there on how to just teach kids to be observers of their surroundings.
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was something we didn't have to think about, right? But as you noted, I mean, even recently this week, I mean, these things happen and we want our kids to be prepared. And these are skills that really all adults should have. We've gotten a lot of feedback from people who read the book who aren't parents and have
Hmm.
still enjoyed
Hmm.
it and taken on these skills for themselves, because you really have to understand them and learn them for you before you can pass them down to your kids. And
Yeah,
it's not
it's
about
true.
teaching them to be aware of their surroundings in a paranoid way, and we try to
Right.
be really realistic about the types of risks that they'll experience. And it's we want to give them the confidence and the abilities to have that autonomy, but also
Mm.
at the same time it helps me with my anxiety. And I'm very transparent in the book that like I am the type of parent who would be the helicopter parent, and I was fully prepared to be that. I
Hmm.
experienced postpartum anxiety. I had all of
Mm.
the products on the market that play to that anxiety, like the little
Yeah.
sock on the foot, which I actually saw is now out of
Uh,
stock because of some tricky
I just
things
saw
that they
that
were
too.
doing.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I definitely used that. So that was interesting. So I experienced a lot of that anxiety after my son was born. It kind of got to a point where I felt like, okay, I need to find a way to, prepare them for the world and not sort of let this anxiety affect their confidence and really just bleed over into everything I do. And so kind of throughout the book, I'm really a proxy for the reader because I'm not always on board with some of these things, right? And I think with parenting, when you're parenting with a partner or a spouse, like,
Mm-hmm.
you're not always going to see eye to eye, and you kind of
Yeah.
compromise on some of those things. And Ryan and I do that as well. Like, I'm more of the anxious parent and he's, a lot more relaxed. And so I think that helps a
Probably
lot
good.
because we
Yeah.
can meet in
Mm-hmm.
the middle, but we also don't always agree on some approaches, and I'm transparent about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let me speak to anxiety for a little while. I think it actually in some ways could calm anxiety, which I think is really the way you explain it so well, is that knowing what your skills are and what control you do have, it can be comforting. So in talking to my high schooler after we had this terrible tragedy in my community, we really, there was certainly so much time and space just for listening to fears, but also I validated that we do feel out of control in these things. And then we had to focus on what we could control. So we talked
Yeah.
about, like, what do you know about the safety plan in your school? What don't you know? Because then we got to find out what can we control. Is there advocacy we can, be part of? So, I think sometimes I found myself like listening to your book and I would go, oh my God, this world is so crazy. And then I was like, but look at this. Like, we can teach these skills. You talk about it even with your little ones. Like, we can teach them as they grow older and then
Yeah,
feel a
in
little
age appropriate
better.
ways. Yeah,
Yeah.
in age appropriate ways. And I think
Yeah.
what you did by having those conversations with your kids, I mean, we did that with our bigs this week. I'm sure parents, all over the US are having
Yes.
those conversations. I sure hope they are. And to be
Yeah.
able to talk through, what is your emergency plan if this happened? And I don't know if you saw, but there was a video that was posted that has gone around that we showed to our teenagers of kids in the classroom at the high school in Michigan. I think is it called Oxford?
Mm-hmm.
They were in the classroom and someone banged on the door and said it was a sheriff's deputy.
Yeah.
And they didn't open the door.
Mm-hmm.
And they, asked, how do we know it's you? And then when the man said, just open the door, bro, all of them immediately reacted and said, he said, bro, that's not a policeman. And they immediately did a concept that we talk about in the book called get off the X.
Mm-hmm.
They thought there was danger. And so they moved. So they all went out through the window. And then you see them actually running and then going over to a police officer. Now, I've also seen that actually could have been a police officer at the door. They didn't confirm whether that was actually the shooter. But I thought it was a really great
Mm-hmm.
example of kids being aware of their surroundings and listening to their gut and getting off the X. I mean, those kids were so smart. And that's exactly what you would want your kids to do. God forbid they were in that situation.
Absolutely. And, I have clients, as a therapist who were in the building, and the stories I've heard, it's really impressive. I mean, it's horrifying, but also the way that they work together. And these teens, they were well trained. They really
Yeah.
knew what needed to be done. There were people who took very clear leadership roles, and everybody sort of did what came naturally to them in a good way and used their strengths. Some people were quietly comforting. Some people were, barking orders, and that needed to be done too.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. It's really a very applicable book to, raising kids in today. And I think there's so much more anxiety in parenting maybe than what our parents lived through. And my husband always likes to say, aside from some things, some phenomenons like school shootings, which I don't even know how to get into that, but in general, like, a lot of crime isn't necessarily worse than it was when we were kids, but we just have it flashing in front of us
Yes.
all the
Yes.
time in media, and that is terrifying as a parent.
It
So
is.
you're
Yeah.
hearing all those one in a million stories in a way
Yeah.
that they feel like they could happen at any second. So, again, like, using some really, like, some of them really common sense approaches and teaching kids these great skills is so comforting as a parent, but also to our kids who have just lived through, it's like 620 days of a pandemic. And all the other things in the world that have also been challenging at the same time. And everyone's feeling, I think, a lot of loss of control right now.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah,
I mean, I think a lot of the idea, and we talk a lot about this in the book too, is that some of these situations we talk to our kids about and prepare them for, we're also acknowledging that statistically, like you said, the chances of it happening are very low. It feels like it's
right.
a lot higher because we are so well connected due to social media nowadays. We think it's
Hmm.
happening really a lot more frequently than it actually is. And
Right.
so everything that we're training them for, it is with the understanding that it is unlikely to happen to them. They're prepared for a
Hmm.
worst case scenario, and then they're able to handle whatever life throws at them. And as part of that, one of the major themes is thinking critically, throughout the book.
Hmm.
I mean, that's something, whether it's an emergency scenario or assessing information, right? We're in a time
Hmm.
where, so much information is floating around, whether it's Twitter, Instagram. We want our kids
Yep.
to be able to assess the source. We want them to understand mindsets and biases of different news
Hmm.
sources, of things people post. Like, we want them to use that critical thinking skill so that they can assess information and know what is true and what they are believing, right? And
Yep.
also, we talk a lot about communication, whether that's oral communication. I
Hmm.
read something about how, like, voicemail is going the way of the carrier pigeon
Oh
because
boy.
people just, are in favor of texting. Some
Uh-huh.
companies actually hire consultants to teach their employees how to make phone calls because that is a skill set kids are losing
My
these
God.
days, right? So we talk a
My
lot
mother-in-law
about,
would love that job. I'm gonna
yeah,
like
yeah,
tell
like, we talk about these things, like, we want our kids to be able to communicate, and that's such a big
her.
part about what you're doing at the CIA, because you're briefing, the president, US policymakers, but you're also
Wow.
writing. If you're an intelligence analyst, you're writing for the president's daily brief book, you're assessing information and
Hmm.
writing those products. But also, if you're doing operations like Ryan did for his career in its entirety, you're still writing. You're writing operational cables, you're writing intelligence reports. And so much of what a spy does isn't necessarily what we see in James
Hmm.
Bond films. It includes writing, it includes, communication skills. And so we talk a lot about what we can take from that and how we can apply it to parenting so that our kids are able to communicate really well and ready to go out into the world. Because, you know what? I mean, I have three. Well, my oldest is in college now, so I have two teenagers still at home. And we interact with a lot of kids in that age group. And it really varies. Like, there will be friends that they bring home who can hold a very mature conversation
Hmm.
with my husband and me. And, we're really impressed. And our goal is that our kids are doing that when they're at their friends' houses and being able to interface with adults as well.
Right.
But there are just as many, if not more, kids who we encounter at that age who really cannot hold a conversation with an adult.
Hmm.
And we really don't want that to be the case. We really want to give our kids these skills so that they're, ready to advocate for themselves, even at this age, in school with
Hmm.
their teachers, with their coaches, but then especially when they get out into the professional workplace so that they're able to do that as well.
Absolutely. And it makes me wonder about, why, if it's part of why kids don't always report things that may not seem right to them, or they just don't have the skills. In part of my career, I worked at a overnight camp for 5 years. I was on the director team, and year after year after year, like, we'd finish the summer and I would get phone calls from parents and really like upset. My kids told me they were miserable the whole time. This kid was being mean to them. And I like think back of all these conversations I had with that kid, like, house camp, it's awesome. Like, they didn't know how to tell us. They may write like a letter that sounds sort of sad to their parents, but the mail is slow. So it would be like an 8-day delay. It didn't
Yeah.
quite work. And it just made me wonder if there's really, I mean, I really do see like a lack of communication skills in this generation. And a lot of the professionals and writers and mentors out there in the teen parenting space, I've been seeing this thing go around saying, like, if you want your child to grow up and be able to advocate and think critically and communicate, you're going to have to allow them to push back to you
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And right. And so it's funny because it's something I've been teaching for years professionally, right? Like, tell us when something's wrong. Tell me when you don't like something. When I meet a new teen or like even young kid as a therapist, I say, listen, you can tell me anything. You can tell me, please tell me if something feels uncomfortable. If I give you an idea and you know it's not right for you, and we talk about how you can say anything to anyone, in a way that's not, that's not rude and doesn't feel, confrontational. We even might practice, but I realized I wasn't doing that in my own house, right? Like, stop yelling at me. I was
Yeah.
shutting it down. So I think you're right. I think it's a really important skill. I talk a lot about like collaboratively problem solving. I write about it all the time. It's in my book with kids and how that's just amazing modeling. Like, even if you're sitting down to solve a big behavior problem, even if that takes a few of those, collaborative problem solving sessions, beyond fixing or learning about that behavior problem, you're also teaching them, like, this is how we want adults to solve problems. We want to, respectfully disagree and advocate for our own needs. So I totally agree. We could definitely spend way more time
Oh,
with
yeah.
communication skills. And, there's so many blessings to media. I definitely see, like, look at this. Like, this is so great. We're not in the same state. We're not in the same time zone. And we got to connect. And now we're bringing information to people. But are teens like used to communicating through like a 5-word text? Yeah, probably. So we may need to intentionally teach skills that no one taught us, because I was just excited to have my own phone line and call waiting.
Right.
Like, that was amazing.
I know, I
Right?
know. It's like they'll never experience, like pulling the phone cord as
Oh
far
my
away
God.
from the kitchen as you can to be around the corner so that like no one hears you on the phone, or like
Yep.
dial up internet.
No.
We had dial up internet and there was like a special phone jack for it in my room. So I actually, as a teenager, went and got my own phone and I plugged it into that and I created my own phone
Oh,
line. And it was eventually
wow.
discovered in the middle of the night when my mom plugged one in like the other room and was like, Christina, are you what are you doing?
Oh boy.
Like
Yeah.
our kids will
Wow.
never, have these experiences. They'll
Yep.
never know. But I love, what you said about pushing back. And one of the things we also talk about is, we want our kids to know that just because someone's an authority figure doesn't mean that
Hmm.
they're right. And that can be an emergency situation. We talk about the 2014 Korean ferry boat disaster, where many of the passengers perished, who most of whom were secondary students. And it's because the voice over the intercom said, stay put in your room, do not leave. It was actually the kids who didn't listen and left their rooms, use those critical thinking skills, went
Hmm.
against authority, that were the ones who survived. So whether it's
Yep.
an emergency situation like that, or whether it's in a class where, one of our teenagers was telling us the other day the way that their teacher was teaching a very recent high profile court case. I won't say which one, there are many, so you can make assumptions as to which one it was. But I was just appalled at learning that the teacher was very transparent about what their political views were, what they thought of, the court case. And I just thought, you should have no idea what your teacher thinks. You should
Hmm.
actually have no idea what your teacher's political leanings are, because your
Right.
teacher's goal should be to teach it objectively and represent both sides so that
Hmm.
you are able to make a decision. And I was just appalled by that. And, our teenager who talked to us about it, that was a red flag for her, and she knew, and she was able to say, okay, well, obviously my teacher falls in this camp and this is what they think, but I know that's their opinion. But there are some kids who might walk away from thinking that that teacher's opinion is
Yep.
fact. And we want our kids to be able to identify when someone's sharing an opinion versus a fact, so that they can look at the information, the data, and make their own informed decision about what they think. And so I love what you said about being able to challenge. And that does mean challenging us as well at home, even
Hmm.
though that can be uncomfortable for us as
Sure.
parents. But
Hmm.
giving them that space to learn that skill set, I think, is really important, a safe space for it.
Right. And how to do it the right way. Right. Like, I don't know. In everything I've done professionally, my life has been made up of very challenging phone calls, right? Maybe they won't be phone calls anymore now that you told me there's no more voicemail. I mean, it's maybe they're going to be Zooms, but I've had to like have hard conversations when working with kids who have, disabilities and challenges with behavior. And I've had to figure out how to do that. It's not like a course in any of my, almost 2 master's degrees, but through, just observing people, I've learned that I can say anything. And sometimes I have to say something I would never dream I'd have to say to another parent, or, another professional, and you can say it in a way that's still respectful and still we're all, you know, it still keeps the line of communication open. So I think it's such a valuable skill.
I love
Absolutely.
that. And I love you mentioned modeling. I think, modeling all different types of behaviors with our kids can be so important. And admittedly, we're not always going to model the right thing.
Of
I
course
know you've talked a lot about, keeping our cool and not yelling at our kids. And I love, I mean, the title of your book alone, I love my kids, but I don't always like them.
not.
Like I feel this in my soul.
Right. I
And so
mean, we all
being
do,
able
right?
to model things like when we do mess up and when we do, yell or lose our temper, to be able to come back and apologize to our kids, whether they're 3 or whether they're 19. And
Hmm.
for me, coming into parenting as a stepmom, my husband had already been parenting for 10 years when we
Yeah.
met. And so that's why a lot of what I talk about in our book are strategies that he was using that we've either changed together, or I've come on board, or
Hmm.
maybe haven't come on board, because the reality is he had been doing this a lot longer than I have. But, when you come in as a stepmom, and your kids are, not newborns, they're actually going to remember things that you do when you mess up as you're like learning your way.
Yeah,
So it
that
was
is true.
definitely,
Hmm.
humbling, because you learn to apologize, and you learn to build that trust, which I think we talk so much about trust in our book, because when you're in the CIA and you're recruiting an intelligence asset, there has to be trust. You're convincing someone to commit
Hmm.
treason on your behalf. If they don't trust you, like, this isn't going to
Yeah.
work. But when
Hmm.
we talk about that trust and loyalty and what that looks like in our relationship with our children, and a lot of that stems back to being able to model those things, like saying I'm sorry, but also using the words I promise sparingly, because when you do use it, your
Hmm.
kids know how much weight it carries, because they know that you only say it when you mean it. And I
Yep.
think that's something that I've learned over the years. It can be so powerful, and that's a tool that we use in our tool belt to kind of build that continued trust with our kids. And then it's all kind of woven together, because when you do have that trust, then that gives you more confidence to give them that autonomy and to give them a bit of that longer leash, because you
Hmm.
know that you've given them the security awareness skills, you've given them the communication skills, and you
Hmm.
trust that they're going to do the right thing. And you trust that if they don't, because everybody messes up, that they're going to feel comfortable enough to come to you
Yep.
for guidance, right? That's the hope. And that's the hope too when it comes to things like technology, right? All the downsides that we kind of
Hmm.
have referred to a little bit and hinted at. We want our kids, we don't lock everything down. I feel like there's a spectrum. You see the parents that, like, it's like laissez-faire, like their kids can do whatever they want. And then there's like the kids who like don't have access to anything, because it's
Right.
the whole slippery slope mentality, which
Sure.
I totally understand and I agree with in a lot of ways. But we try to be somewhere in the middle, because we want our kids to be able to navigate technology as adults. I mean, we see people, all the time posting things and being canceled for, saying something awful, right? And these are
Right.
adults who, you would hope would know better. And so by giving our kids some access to technology with appropriate boundaries while they're in the house, we hope that if they make mistakes, it's while they're with us. We have that trust. We can help them learn how to navigate it, so that when they're out on their own, they know what to post, what not to post. They know how to
Right.
interact with people. And when we lock it down and we don't give them those experiences, we're really not preparing them for the world. But also, like you mentioned, how many months we've been in this pandemic, our kids need to be connected. Technology has been so important, not just in terms of
It has.
education, and
Yeah.
we can debate all day long about whether that's been helpful or hurtful. I don't know. It has its challenges for everyone, but
Sure.
it's helped us stay connected, just like we are now. And we need our kids to be connected to their friends, so that for their mental health, for all of our mental health.
Absolutely. And, I have this blog post I've started like maybe 15 times that one day I'll finish. But I've been thinking about media so much lately, and I agree. When my kids were younger, there was so much emphasis for me on screen time. And I don't know whether that was right or wrong. Who knows? But as I get older and I move more into mental health, and I hear stories upon stories of kids getting the wrong message through social media, or finding something on YouTube that's a tutorial that really is not qualified to be, I realized that rather than that being our battle, I wanted to keep the lines of communication open and talk about using media responsibly. And
Yes.
what to do when you are watching something and you're like, yeah, I don't think I should have seen that. Like, I want them to come talk to
Yeah,
me, not be like, uh-oh, like that was my extra
exactly.
2 minutes of YouTube. I'll be in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
It's so
so,
funny because
yeah.
this has come up with my 5-year-old.
Mm.
They've started like it's funny when you see sort of like a mirror image of yourself, like your
Oh,
best
sure.
and worst qualities like
Mm.
reflected back at you and your
Every
kids.
day. Yeah. Hmm.
And some of it's you're like, oh, and then other you're like, oh, I do that. And so my 5-year-old is like very much like a rule follower, and he's always been sort of more of a black
Mm.
and white thinker, which is how I am naturally as an analyst, but I've really come a long way. My
Uh-huh.
husband is so proud because he kind of lives in the gray as the operations officer. But our 5-year-old, he'll say things like, "Oh, I don't think this is appropriate for us to watch." And usually it is. It's like it. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
But like uses that type of language, and so it's
Hmm.
funny because the other night I left to go to dinner with a girlfriend, and my husband was home, and he said to him, "Daddy, mommy's gone, so we can watch Transformers." And like
There you
my
go.
husband was like so pleased that like he had it in him to like potentially break a rule, and whereas I'm thinking like, oh my boy. And
Right.
so it's
May
funny
that be
because
the worst transgression he ever has. Like, that's amazing. I love it. So
but what's
cute.
so great is like I got home and he actually told me
Of
himself,
course.
which I was like, oh great. I'm sure it won't always be like that, but the innocence of the 5-year
Oh,
old who says everything that happens.
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. I love it. Oh, well, this has been so much fun. I feel like we could talk all night.
Yes.
So much to unpack. Share with everybody watching, and we're gonna post this after if any of you jumped on late, where we can get your book.
Sure. So it is available wherever books are sold. It's called Licensed to Parent: How My Career as a Spy Helped Me Raise Resourceful, Self-Sufficient Kids. And it's available on Amazon, Target.com, independent bookstores. And it's also available in audiobook. Ryan and I
Hmm.
narrated it ourselves, which was
It's
really
awesome.
special. Just to know that that's going to be available, for our kids and our grandkids, long after we're gone, because it's really the story of our family. It's how we came to be this, big blended family. And so that's really special. So it's available on audio and ebook as well. And my website, ChristinaHillsberg.com, is a great place to go. And I'm on Instagram at Christina Hillsberg.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to post this. And thank you guys for joining
Thank
us. And
you.
Christina, this was so much fun. I'm sure
Oh,
we'll
it was so
connect
great.
again.
Yeah,
All
thanks.
right.
Thank
Everyone
you. I
have a good
appreciate it.
night.
Bye.
Bye.